The Galactic Council chamber held 19 species across 200 delegates, 700 standard cycles of diplomatic protocol, 3,000 pages of interstellar law. None of it prepared them for the human. Ambassador Yara Vasquez stood at her designated position, a platform barely large enough for her frame, positioned deliberately smaller than every other delegation's space. The council had designed it that way when humans joined 40 cycles ago, a message of insignificance. Yara had never complained. She simply stood there every session, back straight, eyes forward, taking up exactly the space they gave her. Today, that space felt like the center of the universe. The Veth Dominion has declared right of conquest under Article 19, said Thrax, his feeding mandibles clicking with satisfaction. His chitinous form towered over most delegates, all sharp angles and armored plating. Our fleet of 270 vessels will reach the human homeworld in 6 standard days. We expect no interference. The chamber erupted, not with outrage, with calculations. Delegates whispered to aides, trade pacts shifted, alliances reconsidered. The Veth were the Council's military power. Their territory spanned 300 systems. Their soldiers had never lost a planetary assault. Earth was a minor world with minor technology and a species that had barely survived their own industrial age. Thrax turned toward Yara. The human delegation may begin negotiations for surrender terms. Yara Vasquez was 52 years old. She had gray in her hair and scars on her hands from a childhood spent in a resource extraction colony that had tried to kill her every single day. She had faced this council when they laughed at humanity's request for equal voting rights. She had faced them when they denied aid during the Philos Plague. She had faced them when they carved up HUM Chinese letter territories and gave them to stronger species. She had never once raised her voice. She laughed. The sound cut through the chamber like a blade, not nervous laughter, not desperate. The laugh of someone who has just heard the funniest joke of their life and cannot believe anyone told it with a straight face. Thrax's mandibles froze. You find extinction amusing. Yara composed herself, wiping a tear from her eye. Extinction? No, Ambassador. I find your intelligence reports amusing. She pulled up a datapad, tapping through screens. You're sending 270 ships, 53 troop carriers, 18 orbital bombardment platforms, approximately 400,000 ground forces. We have been thorough. You've been thorough with information from 3 cycles ago. Yara set the datapad down. May I ask a question? Thrax tilted his head, a gesture of condescension. You may ask. How many of your ships have returned fuel? The chamber went still, not silent, still. The difference was everything. Silence was absence. Stillness was anticipation. Every delegate in that room understood they were watching something they would tell stories about for the rest of their lives. Thrax's translator lagged. Return fuel is standard on all Veth military. No, it is. Yara's voice was calm, friendly, even, like she was explaining weather patterns to a child. You're sending your fleet through the Corveth corridor. That route requires a gravitational slingshot maneuver to achieve the speed needed for interstellar transit. Your ships will bleed off that speed by braking against Earth's gravity well. After that burn, your fuel reserves will be at 12%, not enough for the return trip. Thrax said nothing. Which means, Yara continued, you aren't planning a conquest. You're planning an extermination. One-way trip, burn the planet from orbit, no occupation, no prisoners. She smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. Thank you for clarifying that, Ambassador. It helps us calibrate our response. The Council President, a floating gas-based entity from the Cygnus Reach, pulsed with alarm. Ambassador Vasquez, the human delegation must understand the severity of this threat. We can negotiate protections. Civilian evacuation to neutral. We understand perfectly. Yara stepped off her platform. She walked across the chamber floor, something no delegate had ever done during session. Guards shifted nervously. 270 ships, 400,000 troops, 18 bombardment platforms, 6 days. She stopped at the center of the room, directly beneath the council's great seal. Her voice carried to every corner. 6 days is not enough time to evacuate our population. 6 days is not enough time to beg for help from a council that has never helped us. 6 days is exactly enough time for one thing. Thrax's claws scraped his console. And what is that? Yara looked up at him. Her eyes held no fear, no anger, no desperation. They held something far worse. Curiosity. Enough time to make sure every ship in your fleet burns on the way down. She turned and walked out of the chamber. No one stopped her. No one could. Behind her, Thrax's communication console blinked with an incoming priority signal from his fleet's advanced scout. He opened it. The image showed Earth. Not a planet preparing for invasion. A planet waiting for one. And in low orbit, where his scouts had reported no defenses just 3 days ago, there were now lights. Thousands of them, growing brighter by the hour. Thrax's mandibles opened, closed, opened. He had just declared war on a species that had spent 40 cycles learning exactly how the Council's weapons worked. The Veth hadn't attacked a defenseless world. They had walked into a trap that had been setting itself since the day humanity joined the Council. And somewhere in the depths of his tactical mind, Thrax realized the most terrifying truth of all. The humans had never asked for help. Because they never needed it. Council records showed humanity's first contact occurred 42 cycles ago. A survey vessel from the Orin Collective had detected anomalous energy readings from the Sol system's third planet. The readings were not technological. They were biological. Something on that world was generating electromagnetic fluctuations powerful enough to interfere with nearby navigation systems. The survey team expected a natural phenomenon. They found Chicago. Orin scientist Vextalan wrote in his initial report, "The dominant species has constructed structures visible from orbit. They have not yet achieved unified global governance. They continue to engage in armed conflict with their own kind. They possess approximately 10,000 nuclear warheads. They are not ready for contact." The Council agreed. Earth was labeled a quarantine world. Observation only. No interaction. The species calling themselves humans would either destroy themselves or evolve past their violent tendencies within a few thousand cycles. Either way, they were not the Council's concern. Then the humans noticed the observation drones. Not through advanced sensor technology, through pattern recognition. A human astronomer named Mendez detected an object in lunar orbit that moved in ways natural objects did not move. She published her findings. Other humans verified them. Within 3 months, every Council observation drone in the Sol system had been cataloged, tracked, and mapped. The Council panicked. They accelerated first contact by 2,000 cycles. Ambassador Vextalan, promoted for his initial discovery, descended to Earth's surface expecting to address a unified global government. Instead, he found himself in a windowless room with representatives from 193 sovereign states who could not agree on lunch menus, let alone interstellar diplomacy. Vextalan delivered the Council's standard first contact address, a greeting, an offer of trade, a warning about galactic dangers, and a request for peaceful coexistence. The humans asked one question. What are the dangers? Vextalan explained. The Vorax hive, the Dyson swarm pirates, the gravitational anomalies of the Cygnus rift, the K-class civilization that had weaponized stellar fusion. The humans asked another question. How do we fight them? Vextalan explained that humans could not fight them. Humans were a Type 0 civilization. They had barely survived their own atmosphere. Their bodies were fragile. Their technology was primitive. Their role in galactic society would be passive, observation, cultural exchange, perhaps trade in raw materials. The human delegation looked at each other. Then they laughed. Not like Yara Vasquez would laugh decades later. This was different. This was the laughter of people who had just been told the ocean was too big to cross, The sky was too high to reach. The ground was too hard to dig through. Humans had been hearing those words since their species learned to speak, and every single time, they had proven the speakers wrong. Vextalan did not understand the laughter. He filed it under cultural anomaly and returned to his ship. 40 cycles later, the Council understood perfectly. In those 40 cycles, humanity had not asked for military technology. They had not requested defensive alliances. They had not begged for protection from the Vorax hive or the Dyson swarm or any of the other threats that made lesser species tremble. Instead, they had done something the Council considered incomprehensible. They had watched human ships, slow, primitive, laughable by galactic standards, had explored every corner of Council space. Human scientists had studied every weapon system. Human diplomats had cataloged every political weakness, every strategic blind spot, every cultural pressure point of every species in the Council. The Council had allowed this because humans were harmless. What could a Type 0 civilization do with information? They didn't have the resources to build galactic warships. They didn't have the population to field interstellar armies. They didn't have the technology to threaten anyone. They had something better. They had time. Earth's gravity was brutal by galactic standards. Most species evolved on worlds with half the gravitational pull. A human body subjected to that pull every day developed bones like composite armor, muscles like hydraulic presses, cardiovascular systems that could survive wounds that would kill any other species in the Council. The Council knew this. They had medical records. They had biological studies. They had classified the human homeworld as a high-gravity environment and moved on. What they had not done was connect that biological reality to strategic thinking. Humans didn't build warships because they didn't need warships. They built engines. Engines powerful enough to lift ships off a world that wanted to crush them. Engines that could accelerate faster, turn harder, burn longer than anything the Council had ever built, because they had to. Anything less would have been crushed by Earth's gravity before it reached orbit. The Veth fleet was approaching Earth, with ships designed for standard gravity environments. They had no idea what was waiting for them. On Earth, Admiral Marcus Webb stood in a command bunker buried beneath the Rocky Mountains. He was 73 years old. He had spent 40 years preparing for this exact moment, not because he wanted war, because he understood something the Council had never bothered to learn. Humans didn't want to fight, but they were very, very good at finishing fights. He looked at the tactical display: 270 Veth ships, 400,000 troops, 18 bombardment platforms. He touched his communicator. All stations. The enemy has declared their intention to exterminate our species. You know your assignments. You know your targets. You know what happens if we fail. He paused. None of us intend to fail. Across Earth, in every city, every town, every solitary farmstead, humans stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky. They knew what was coming. They had always known. And they were ready. Admiral Kale of the Veth Dominion had conquered 14 worlds. His tactics were studied in military academies across the galaxy. His name was whispered by enemies who had watched their homeworlds burn from orbit. He was the most successful fleet commander in Veth history. He was also terrified. The Corvath corridor transit had been flawless. 270 ships emerged from warp in perfect formation, their drives burning hot, their weapons primed. Earth hung before them. A blue-green marble swirled with white clouds, beautiful and fragile and utterly defenseless. Kale's sensors showed nothing. No orbital fortifications. No defense platforms. No shipyards. The humans had not even bothered to put armed satellites around their world. It was as if they had simply decided not to defend themselves. "Status report," Kale commanded. His tactical officer, Commander Vex, stared at his display with an expression Kale had never seen before. Confusion mixed with something else. Something Kale did not want to name. "Admiral, The planet is generating unusual energy signatures. Define unusual. Every major population center is broadcasting on identical frequencies, not military channels, civilian networks, public access, the same signal repeating across the entire planetary surface. Kale's mandibles tightened. Show me. The main display flickered. An image appeared, not a transmission from any single source, but a composite of thousands of feeds stitched together by Vex's computers. It showed streets, plazas, rooftops, open fields. Everywhere the camera looked, there were humans, standing still, looking up. Not running, not hiding, not screaming. Standing. And above them, on rooftops and in windows and on hilltops, objects glinted in the sunlight. Weapons. Not military-grade energy rifles, not plasma casters, projectile weapons, chemical-propelled slug throwers. The kind of weapons the Council had classified as primitive 5,000 years ago. Kale felt something cold crawl through his feeding tubes. They're armed with antiques. They're armed with everything, Vex corrected. Agricultural equipment, industrial tools, hunting weapons, construction machinery. They've mobilized their entire civilian population. Every human capable of holding a weapon appears to have one. That's impossible. Civilian populations don't organize without military direction. There must be a command structure. Find it. Vex tried. His sensors swept across the planetary surface, analyzing communications patterns, identifying command nodes, searching for the central nervous system of Earth's defense network. He found nothing. Because there was nothing to find. There was no central command, no unified chain of authority, no single point of failure that Veth tactics could exploit. Every human city was coordinating independently. Every human region was fighting its own war. Every human soldier, if such a primitive word even applied, was receiving orders from local leaders who had never attended a military academy in their lives. And yet they moved with perfect synchronization. Supply convoys rolled through bombed-out streets. Medical teams established triage centers in underground parking garages. Children ran messages between defensive positions because they knew the terrain better than any adult. Kale had studied humanity's military history during the transit. He had read about their world wars, their civil conflicts, their endless capacity for violence against their own kind. He had dismissed it as the death throes of a species too stupid to stop killing itself. He had been wrong. Humans didn't fight each other because they were violent. They fought each other because they were practicing. Admiral, Vex's voice cracked. I'm detecting energy signatures from the planetary surface, thousands of them, all pointing upward. Kale's display showed targeting lasers, not military grade, not even particularly powerful, civilian-grade targeting systems attached to civilian-grade weapons, enough to mark targets for orbital observation, enough to tell the Veth exactly where every human defender was standing, enough to make Kale realize the humans weren't hiding because they wanted him to see them. They wanted him to know exactly who was shooting at him. Launch the first wave, Kale ordered. Target population centers, suppressing fire only. We need ground forces to secure landing zones before. Admiral, Vex's voice was barely a whisper. The humans are hailing us. On screen. The face that appeared was not a military commander. It was not a government official. It was not even a soldier. It was an old woman, gray hair pulled back in a practical knot, wrinkled hands folded on a wooden table. Behind her, through a window, Kale could see smoke rising from a burning city. She looked into the camera with eyes that had seen 80 years of human life. Births, deaths, wars, peace, loss, love, all of it compressed into a single stare that made Kale feel like prey. Admiral Kale, she said, her voice was soft, almost kind. My name is Margaret Chen. I'm a retired school teacher. I've lived in this house for 42 years. My husband built it with his own hands. He died in it 6 years ago. She paused. Behind her, the smoke thickened. You're about to burn it down, I understand. You're a soldier, you follow orders, you don't have a choice. She reached off-screen and lifted something into view. An old weapon, wooden stock, steel barrel, a hunting rifle her grandfather had carried through a war 3 generations ago. But I want you to understand something, Admiral. When your soldiers come through that door, and they will come through that door, they will find me sitting right here. I will not run, I will not hide, I will not beg. She worked the rifle's action. The sound was metallic and final. And before I die, I'm going to kill as many of you as I can. The transmission ended. Kale stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Then he gave the order. All ships commence planetary assault. Above Earth, 270 Veth vessels opened fire. And 400,000 human soldiers, and teachers and farmers and grandmothers and children fired back. The first drop pods hit Earth's atmosphere at 2:30 Greenwich Mean Time. Veth doctrine called for saturation landings. Concentrated forces dropped directly onto strategic targets to overwhelm local defenses before organized resistance could form. Standard procedure on 14 conquered worlds. Standard procedure against species that followed predictable military logic. Humanity had never read the Veth tactical manual. The first pod opened over Shanghai. 40 Veth soldiers emerged into a city of 24 million people. They expected panic. They expected chaos. They expected civilians fleeing in terror, clogging streets, making it easy to establish a perimeter and begin systematic pacification. Instead, the streets were empty. Not abandoned, not evacuated, empty in the way a hunting ground is empty when the prey has become the predator. The Veth patrol moved through canyons of silent buildings, their sensors sweeping for heat signatures, finding nothing. No civilians, no resistance, no one. Then the first window opened. A child, no more than 12 years old, leaned out of a 4th-story apartment and dropped a bundle of fireworks wrapped in electrical tape. The explosion wasn't powerful enough to kill. It was designed to do something worse, to blind, to disorient, to tell every Veth soldier in the patrol that they were being watched. The soldiers opened fire. Plasma bolts tore through the apartment facade. The child was already gone down a service staircase, through a basement tunnel, into a sewer system that had been mapped and prepared weeks ago. Other windows opened. Other bundles fell. The Veth patrol found themselves in a kill zone that wasn't a kill zone because no one was dying. Humans were hurting them, channeling them, moving them exactly where the humans wanted them to go. Commander T-Car realized what was happening 10 seconds too late. The street ahead narrowed into an alley. The alley ended at a brick wall. Behind them, the road had been blocked by a collapsed building that hadn't collapsed at all. It had been demolished in a controlled pattern, with explosives placed precisely to create a funnel. T-Car raised his weapon. Disperse, find cover, do not stay in the open. 40 soldiers scattered. And 40 blocks away, a construction worker named Li Wei watched the Veth movement patterns on a tablet screen. He had spent 30 years operating heavy machinery. He knew how to predict where objects would move when subjected to force. He knew how to apply that force at exactly the right moment. He pressed a button. 3 blocks ahead of T-Car's position, a crane collapsed across the road. Not randomly, directly onto the path the Veth soldiers would take when they scattered. The steel beam weighed 14 tons. It crushed 3 soldiers instantly. The rest scrambled backward, right into the kill zone Li Wei had already prepared. The crane had been placed there 6 days ago, bolted down, wired with explosives, waiting. Every human on the planet had been waiting. In London, retired veterinarian Hannah Mahmood led a group of 17 civilians, average age 64, in a defense of the Westminster Bridge. They had no military training. They had no heavy weapons. They had 2 hunting rifles, a collection of kitchen knives, and a deep and abiding understanding of the bridge's structural weaknesses. The Veth company assigned to secure the bridge had 300 soldiers, armored transports, and orbital fire support. They never reached the South Bank. Hannah had spent 40 years studying animal behavior. She knew how to read predators, how to anticipate their movements, how to set traps that exploited their instincts. The Veth were predators, evolved from pack hunters, programmed to pursue fleeing prey. So the humans on Westminster Bridge did not flee. They stood their ground. They fired their antique weapons. They made themselves targets. And while the Veth focused on the old people with guns, 17-year-old Jamal Hakim led his younger brother through the maintenance tunnels beneath the bridge. They carried no weapons. They carried backpacks filled with industrial solvent, fertilizer, and a detonator stolen from a construction site. The explosion didn't kill many Veth. It wasn't supposed to. It collapsed the bridge's central span, dropping the Veth company into the Thames, where the water temperature was 4 degrees Celsius, cold enough to kill a Veth soldier in less than 10 minutes. Humans could survive that water for hours. Hannah Mahmoud watched the Veth thrash and sink. She lowered her rifle. She had killed nothing today. She had simply moved the enemy into a place where the environment would do the work for her. "That's for my grandson," she whispered. The Veth had killed him in the first orbital bombardment. She turned and walked back toward her neighborhood. There would be more Veth tomorrow, more traps to set, more environmental weapons to deploy. On 14 worlds, the Veth had never lost a planetary assault. On Earth, they had not yet realized they were fighting a species that had evolved to weaponize everything, not just guns and bombs, weather, terrain, time, themselves. The Veth dropped 400,000 soldiers onto Earth. In the first 24 hours, they lost 40,000. The humans lost 3. Not because the humans were better soldiers, because the humans had spent their entire existence learning how to turn their own world into a weapon, and the Veth had just walked into the middle of it. Admiral Kale received the casualty reports in his flagship's command center. He read them twice, then a third time. He turned to Commander Vex. "Get me Ambassador Thrax, now." The Council needed to know what was happening. The Council needed to send reinforcements. The Council needed to do something, anything, before the humans finished what they had started. Ambassador Thrax received Admiral Kale's transmission 6 hours after the first landing. He watched it in a secure Council communications bay, far from the main chamber, far from any human ears. Kale's image flickered. The Admiral looked. There was no other word for it, broken. His mandibles hung slack. His carapace showed stress fractures from repeated clenching. His voice, when it came, was barely recognizable. "Ambassador, the invasion has failed." Thrax's feeding tubes went cold. "Explain." "We secured landing zones in 43 major population centers. We established perimeter defenses around 16 planetary defense installations. We achieved all initial objectives within the first 8 hours. Kale's image shuddered. And then the humans stopped playing by the rules. What rules? Military doctrine, tactical logic, physics. I don't know anymore. I don't know anything. Kale grabbed his display and pulled it close. They're not defending their planet, Ambassador. They're poisoning it. Every structure we capture becomes a trap. Every supply convoy we send out is ambushed before it reaches its destination. Every patrol we dispatch vanishes into terrain that seems to actively fight against us. Thrax felt something he had never felt before. Fear, not strategic concern, not tactical uncertainty, primal, gut-level terror. How many casualties? Kale's mandibles trembled. We've lost 112,000 soldiers in 6 days. The humans have lost fewer than 500 civilians. We haven't confirmed a single military casualty because we haven't found their military. They don't have one. They're just people, teachers, shopkeepers, construction workers, and they're slaughtering us. Thrax tried to process the numbers. 112,000 against 500. The ratio was impossible. Even against an unprepared enemy, the Veth had never suffered worse than 3-to-1 casualties. This was 224-to-1. In the Veth's favor. No, not in their favor. against them. Request reinforcements, Thrax said. All available reserves, every ship in the Dominion fleet. Kale shook his head. You don't understand. Reinforcements won't help, not unless you can send 1 million soldiers, 10 million. The humans aren't fighting a war, Ambassador. They're running an extermination, and we're the ones being exterminated. The transmission crackled. Behind Kale, an alarm began to sound. The Admiral looked over his shoulder, and Thrax watched the last hope drain from his eyes. What is it? Thrax demanded, what's happening? The humans, Kale whispered. They're launching ships. The transmission cut off. Thrax stood in the communications bay for a long moment. Then he walked, not ran, never ran back to the council chamber. Delegates turned to watch him enter. They had heard rumors. They had seen fragments of battlefield footage leaked through civilian channels. They knew something had gone wrong. They did not know how wrong. The human homeworld, Thrax announced, has activated a planetary defense network. Our fleet is engaged in combat operations. I am requesting emergency military assistance from all council members under Article 12 of the Mutual Defense Pact. Silence. Not the silence of shock, the silence of calculation. Every delegate in that room was doing the same math Thrax had done. If the Veth, the most powerful military force in the council, could not conquer one primitive world, then that world was not primitive. And if that world had just launched ships? The council president pulsed with agitation. Ambassador Thrax, the council requires more information before committing to military action. Perhaps a diplomatic solution could be. The chamber doors opened. Yara Vasquez walked in. She was not alone. Behind her, projected on the largest display the council chamber possessed, was an image of Earth's orbit. The image showed 270 Veth ships, the ones that had arrived 6 days ago. It also showed something else. 5,000 human ships rising from the planet's surface, not primitive vessels, not the slow, fragile craft the council had observed for 40 cycles. Warships, built in secret, armed in darkness, powered by engines that should have been impossible for a Type 0 civilization. Engines that had been developed in the gravity well of a world that crushed everything weaker than iron. The human ships didn't fly. They climbed. They accelerated with a ferocity that made Veth vessels look stationary. They moved through the orbital battlefield like predators finally allowed to hunt. Yara Vasquez stepped onto her platform, the tiny one, the one designed to make her insignificant. She looked up at Thrax. You asked for reinforcements, she said. So did we. On the display, the first human ships reached the Veth fleet. Plasma torpedoes, stolen, reverse-engineered, improved, streaked across the void. Veth shields flickered and failed. Veth armor buckled and shattered. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were winning. Thrax watched his fleet die in real time. Ship after ship exploded, their crews venting into vacuum, their commanders screaming for help that would never come. The human ships moved through the wreckage with a grace that should have been impossible for vessels of their size. They had trained for this. They had prepared for this. They had built their entire civilization for this single moment. And in the center of the council chamber, Yara Vasquez stood perfectly still, watching Thrax watch his fleet burn. You made one mistake, Ambassador, she said. Thrax couldn't look away from the display. What mistake? You assumed we were defenseless because we didn't show you our weapons, she smiled. We learned that from you, from every species in the council. You show your strength because you want to intimidate. We hide our strength because we want to survive. Another Veth ship exploded. We've been watching you for 40 cycles, Yara continued. Every weapon system, every tactical doctrine, every political weakness. We know you better than you know yourselves. And we've been building ships that can exploit every single one of your vulnerabilities. Thrax finally turned to face her. This was a trap. This was an invitation, Yara corrected. We knew someone would come eventually. The council doesn't leave weak species alone. We just wanted to make sure that whoever came first would regret it so deeply that everyone else would think twice. The display showed the last Veth ship, Admiral Kale's flagship, surrounded by 20 human vessels. It wasn't firing. Its weapons were disabled. Its engines were dead. Its crew was waiting to die. The humans didn't kill it. They sent a boarding party instead. Thrax didn't need to ask why. He already knew. The humans weren't just winning a battle. They were capturing prisoners, intelligence, technology. They were going to take everything the Veth had brought to Earth and use it to build even more ships. The trap wasn't closing. It was expanding. Admiral Kale woke up in a room that smelled of recycled air and antiseptic. His carapace had been splinted in 4 places. His left mandible was missing. His vision swam with the aftereffects of whatever sedative the humans had used. He was alive. He wished he was. A human sat across from him, not a soldier, no uniform, no weapons, just a man in civilian clothes with gray hair and tired eyes. He looked like a grandfather. He looked like someone's beloved uncle. He looked like the kind of person you would trust with your children. Kale had learned to fear that look. "Admiral Kale," the man said, "my name is Dr. Samuel Reyes. I'm a linguist. I've been assigned to facilitate communication between you and our military command." "Facilitate," Kale rasped. His translator struggled to form the word through damaged mandibles. "You mean interrogate." "I mean communicate. What happens next depends entirely on you and your crew." Dr. Reyes leaned forward. "Your fleet is destroyed. Your remaining soldiers on Earth have been captured or killed. Your government has no idea where you are or what condition you're in. You have no reinforcements coming. You have no hope of rescue." Kale said nothing. What was there to say? "But we're not going to kill you," Dr. Reyes continued. "We're not going to torture you. We're not going to put you in a cage and throw away the key. We're going to give you medical treatment, food, water, shelter, and when you're healthy enough to travel, we're going to send you back to the Veth Dominion." Kale's remaining mandible twitched. "Why?" "Because we want you to tell your people what happened here, not the official report, not the sanitized version your government will release. The truth. You saw it. You lived it. Your species needs to understand what happens when you attack a human world." Dr. Reyes stood up. He walked to the door and paused with his hand on the frame. "One more thing, Admiral. The ships you saw rising from Earth, those were our reserves. Our primary fleet has already left Sol. They're heading toward Veth space right now. They'll arrive in approximately 3 weeks." Kale's world collapsed. "You're invading us." "We're responding," Dr. Reyes said. "There's a difference. You declared war on our species. You bombed our cities. You killed our people. We're just making sure you never have the capacity to do it again." The door closed. Kale sat alone in the room, listening to the ventilation system hum, feeling his broken body pulse with pain. 3 weeks. A human fleet was 3 weeks from Veth space, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing, he could do to stop them. In the council chamber, Yara Vasquez watched the same strategic display as every delegate in the room. The human fleet, 7,000 ships, was moving through the Korvath corridor at speeds that defied explanation. They weren't using the gravitational slingshot. They didn't need it. Their engines were powerful enough to make the transit without assistance. 7,000 ships. Against a Veth Dominion that had just lost 270 vessels and 400,000 soldiers. The Dominion's remaining fleet numbered perhaps 800 ships, scattered across 300 systems, unable to concentrate in time to meet the human advance. The Veth were going to lose. Not just the war, everything, their territory, their influence, their position in the council, all of it would be stripped away by a species they had dismissed as primitive. Thrax stood at his delegation platform, watching the display with hollow eyes. He had not spoken in 6 hours. He had not moved. He had simply stood there, watching the human fleet move closer and closer to his homeworld. Yara turned away from the display. She looked at the council president. "The human delegation requests an emergency session to discuss new borders for Veth space. The chamber erupted. But no one objected. Not really. What could they say? The humans had just defeated the most powerful military force in the galaxy. They had done it with ships built in secret. They had done it with weapons reverse-engineered from Council technology. They had done it by being smarter, more patient, more ruthless than anyone had anticipated. The Council could object. Or the Council could adapt. Most of the delegates were already calculating how to profit from the Veth's collapse. New trade routes. New alliances. New opportunities. The Veth had been the Council's enforcers for centuries. Now they were prey. And the humans were the new predators. The emergency session lasted 14 hours. By the end, the Veth Dominion had been reduced to 40 systems, 1/10 of their original territory. The rest had been divided among the Council's other members, with the humans receiving the largest share. Yara Vasquez signed the treaty without reading it. She had negotiated every word. She knew it better than the lawyers who had drafted it. She signed with a pen, a physical pen made of metal and ink, because humans still used such things, and handed the document to the Council president. "The human delegation accepts these terms," she said. Thrax stood across the chamber, his carapace dull with grief. "You've destroyed us." Yara turned to face him. "We defended ourselves." "You planned this from the beginning. You wanted us to attack." "We wanted someone to attack. We didn't care who." Yara walked toward him. The chamber guards tensed but didn't intervene. "You saw a weak species and you tried to exterminate it. That's what the Veth do. That's what the Council allows. We just decided to make sure you couldn't do it to anyone else." Thrax's mandibles clicked. "What happens now?" "Now we go home. We rebuild our cities. We bury our dead. We wait for the next species to decide we look like easy prey." Yara stopped a few feet from him. "But before we do, I want to show you something." She pulled out a datapad and activated its display. The image showed Earth not from orbit but from the surface. A field of white stones stretched to the horizon. Graves, thousands of them, tens of thousands. "These are the humans who died in your invasion," Yara said. 643 civilians. Most of them died in the first orbital bombardment. The ones you killed before we could organize our defense. Thrax stared at the graves. "You said you lost 500. "I lied. We lost 643. I didn't want you to know the real number." Yara turned off the display. "But I want you to understand something, Ambassador. 643 humans died. You lost 112,000 soldiers. Those are the numbers you'll remember. Those are the numbers the Council will use to measure your defeat." She stepped closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But the number I want you to remember is 643, because those were our people, our mothers, our fathers, our children, and every single one of them died knowing that we would avenge them, not because we wanted revenge, because we wanted you to understand that attacking humanity has a cost so high that no species in this galaxy will ever be willing to pay it twice." Thrax tried to speak. His translator failed. Yara turned and walked toward the chamber doors. She paused at the threshold and looked back at the Council, all 19 species, 200 delegates, the most powerful beings in the galaxy. She played a recording. The sound filled the chamber. Not music, not speech. A deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the floor, through the walls, through the bones of every being in the room. It was the sound of Earth's planetary defense network activating. Not the network that had destroyed the Veth fleet. A different network, a larger one that had not been used because it had not been needed, one that surrounded every human world in every human system, including the 40 new systems the Council had just granted them. The hum faded. Yara Vasquez smiled. "Thank you for your time, honored delegates. Humanity looks forward to our continued cooperation." She walked out. The Council chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then the delegates began to speak all at once, all asking the same question. What had just happened? What had they allowed to happen? And most importantly, What would happen next? Across the galaxy, on 100 worlds, in 1,000 military command centers, the answer was already becoming clear. The humans had not just won a war. They had announced their arrival. They had shown every species in the Council exactly what happened when you underestimated them. The Veth had attacked Earth, and Earth had let them, just to show everyone else what happens next. The end.